Hey everyone, welcome to Career Bolt. I'm Vinod and I'm fielding some student questions today. So I posted a video earlier which is about what is happening with Indian students in the US. So we talked a little bit about students, some of the pressures they're facing, like financial pressures and work pressures. So one of the comments I got was from Karthikeyan Kalyanamurthy. So his question was very informative, sir. Will you please provide some insight about other countries like UK, Singapore, Germany, etc., with respect to higher studies following job opportunities, PR, etc.? So this video is basically to answer Karthikeyan's question. So Karthikeyan is asking questions of like, how are other countries for higher studies and how do they compare with the US? So let's take it one step at a time. Let's compare each one of these countries along with the US. So again, a recount of what's happening in the US is that to work in the US, you need something called H-1B visa. And right now, the H-1B visas are very competitive. So as a student, everyone goes through the H-1B process where basically you finish your education, you get 1 year where you are on something called OPT visa, which is sponsored by the university. And as soon as the 1 year gets over, your company has to be applying to something called H-1B work visa. That's the only way you get to work in the US. The only trouble right now is that the number of applicants for H-1B visas has gone up sky high, but the number of slots is minimal. So there are around 85,000 slots for H-1B visas, and it's based on a lottery system. And currently there are around 8 lakh candidates applying for these visas. So there's approximately around 10% chance of you getting the visa. And this is very different in the past. Where I remember in 10 years back, some of my friends had been part of 40,000 people applying for 85,000 slots. Anybody who applied used to get the visa. This is around around 2011, and things have changed a lot, and now it's much more competitive. So when you're thinking of being in the US, this is probably the number one problem you will encounter. That how will you live long term in the US? How will you work long term in the US? How will you file for a green card unless you have the H-1B visa? And the odds of getting H-1B visas are around 10%. There is another category of visa called L1 visa, but that's not applicable for students. What some of the other students do in terms of STEM students to get over this problem is that if you're in a STEM degree in the US, you get something called a 3-year OPT period to work in the US. So for 3 years post your graduation, you can work in the US. And if you don't get an H-1B visa after the end of the 3 years, you'll have to come back to India, or you could be sent to a different country, but that's totally dependent on the company. Okay, there's no guarantees. So if you're doing a STEM-based degree in the US, you get 3 years OPT. If you're doing a regular MBA, for example, I did an MBA in the US, and you only get 1 year of OPT. And after 1 year, if you don't get your H-1B, you have to go to other countries. So let's look at the other options. So how does UK compare with respect to US when it comes to settling down and working? And I think UK is definitely much easier compared to the US when it comes to being there long term and settling down in UK. So if you really want to settle down in one country, I feel that US is very tricky because the competition for H-1B is very high. There's no or limited chances of you getting the H-1B visa. But in UK, it's very different. Most people who apply, I believe, do get it. They have a system by which you apply for jobs, and then once you get the job, it's much more easier to actually end up with a work visa. I have a mentee who's right now studying in the Imperial College and Imperial University, and I know studying at Imperial, he was telling me that even if he doesn't find a job, he will be getting a chance to be in the UK for around 2 years, I think. And then he can, even if he gets a job in between, that's fine. So there's no pressure like the US if you're in the UK as a student. But in terms of settling down long term, it's much, much easier in the UK to get a long term permanent visa. The entire green card process is also much simpler. It's not called a green card in UK, but it's much simpler. In the US, after you graduate, it is going to take you around 5 to 6 years by the time the company files for the green card. And from the time of filing, it could be around 10 to 12 years by the time you get your green card. So by the time you finish your graduation, it could take you between 5 plus 10, around 15 to 17 years by the time you get your green card. So what I'm saying is most people are pretty much in their late 30s, early 40s, or some people even their late 40s by the time they get their green card. And then if you want to get a citizenship in the US, you need to stick around for 5 more years after getting a green card. So many people are in their mid 40s or early 50s by the time they get their citizenship in the US. It's much more simpler in UK, where I think you just spend 4 or 5 years, you are able to get long-term status of being in the UK, and citizenship process also much more easier. There's a per capita country cap when it comes to getting the H1B translated to green card and getting the green card conversion done. But I think that process doesn't work in the UK, where the policies are much more straightforward. It's not as bad as the US. So definitely, in terms of work opportunities, study opportunities, I believe that UK could be a good option if you want to get a citizenship or an equivalent to green card as fast as possible. There is one disadvantage to UK though, is that there are not as many jobs in UK as compared to the US. So UK is a place which is by the UK is a very small country compared to India. The number of people there are way smaller compared to India. So London is a great city, but at the same time, it is a small market. So not too many companies have a base out there, but still, for a long time, London has been the financial capital of the world. So that means that many companies have their headquarters based out of London. So if you're, for example, working in finance, the best places to be, the top two places to be are either New York or London. So that way, I think it's got a very good prestige and cachet, which you can obviously utilize. So if you want to be in consulting, again, London is a fantastic place to be in. If you are in manufacturing, I just don't think that that's, I mean, you will always find jobs in UK, but I just feel that Europe has outsourced most of its jobs to China, manufacturing jobs to China. So you will not find much of the high-end jobs. If you're in Germany, for example, you might get very high-end manufacturing jobs, but I don't think you'll get that in UK. So again, it's dependent on which sector you want to be in. But overall, I think there are good opportunities in UK, but it could actually take a long time to find a good job because the labor market is very tight right now, both in US and in Europe. Europe has been hit particularly hard by the war in Ukraine. So I think the chances of getting jobs is less, and you just got to be very, very patient. How about a country like Singapore? I think Singapore is a fantastic option. Singapore is a place where everything is streamlined. So getting like a permanent residentship, getting a citizenship, etc., is much more simpler than other countries. So definitely, I think Singapore is a very good option. It's also called the gateway to Asia. So a lot of countries have set up base in Singapore. So again, you want to be in some of the tech companies. I have a friend who's working in Apple in Singapore after finishing an MBA from INSEAD. So Singapore is a very good place to meet. A lot of friends who are not very comfortable working in India, they want to go to another country. Many of them ended up in Singapore. So again, that is indeed a very good option. Settling down there is much easier. They also have a lot of Indian restaurants. One of their official languages is Tamil. So they really love Indians. And I mean, there has been some little bit of riots in the recent past in terms of Indians and Singaporeans. But keeping that aside, I think Singapore is generally a very good place to be in for Indians. It's a very comfortable place. It's very much like South Indians in terms of temperature. The food is as spicy as what people have in South India. So in lots of ways, it's very similar to India. And you can have very good time there. There are lots of temples out there. And like I said, even if you go to the railway stations in Singapore, one of the official languages is in Tamil. And they keep making announcements in Tamil, which means that, again, they really value the language a lot. So it's a good place to be in, no doubt about it. Germany is great if you're looking at jobs in manufacturing. I don't think it's a great place to be in if you're looking at jobs in finance and if you're looking at jobs in consulting and so on. I think London is a better place. UK is a better place. But Germany is very good for electrical, electronics, or if you want to be in manufacturing jobs, high-end machining jobs. I think those are fantastic places. So I think Germany offers options to core engineering students to develop careers out there. And it's among the few countries in Europe which is not sunk. Even though its growth has come down, it's still one of the engines of Europe's growth. France and Germany are the two countries which are growing very fast in Europe. So it's a good bet to be in Germany. I think the only issue in Germany is that everybody talks in Germany all the time, German language, and you got to pick up the language. So if you know only English, then you can pretty much survive only in UK, which is basically United Kingdom, Scotland, and Ireland, right? The Great Britain is all you can ever be in. You can also maybe survive in Switzerland, where English is spoken in some places, but even in Switzerland, a lot of places which speak in German. So again, picking up a language is very important. Some people at a certain age are not able to pick up a new language. If you fall into that category, maybe you should not be considering going to Europe and picking up a new language. Maybe you should probably target US, Canada, or UK. So that's the way I look at Germany. It's very good for engineering jobs, very good for electrical jobs, high-end machining, high-end automotive jobs. And there are all these fantastic options out there. And it's not as competitive as other countries. I think that's the biggest advantage. And I think something which most people miss out is the fact that in Germany, many of the universities, the tuition fees is free. So you only need to pay for living expenses, and it's really cheap in Germany. It's not that expensive, depending on the city you're in. So it's also easy to get admission in Germany. There's lots of universities, very good universities. You can always get in there. So lots of Indians love to go to Germany because of all these options. And I think it's definitely a very good option for you to also pursue, because tuition is low. There are reasonably good jobs you can get in Germany. They're very good automotive jobs. They're very good mechanical, electrical jobs. And they are among the engines of Europe's economy. They are doing really well, one of the largest economies in the world. So that way, I think Germany is doing really well. And I think their per capita income is also much higher. So you can also get paid pretty well for working in Germany. I'm not very clear about the citizenship path, but I would suspect that it's not as complex as the US. So that gives you some example of what it is to be in Europe versus, say, US. I would also like to bring attention to some other countries which nobody thinks about. So some other countries like South Korea, Japan, and Canada are also worth thinking about. For example, looking at South Korea, they've got fantastic conglomerates. A lot of them have bases in India. So studying in South Korea can also be a very good option. I know people who have done master's degrees in South Korea and Japan and then gone on to do PhDs in the best of US universities like Stanford, MIT, and so on. So it's also worth pursuing, because most places in Korea and Japan, they give you full scholarships. So there is a video on scholarships on my YouTube channel, which talks about scholarships in South Korea and Japan. Just check up that video. It talks about lots and lots of scholarships being open to Indian students studying there. So you don't need to spend money on education if you cannot afford it. And maybe South Korea, Japan are great places to target. They have a huge problem because their population numbers are not able to replace themselves because the birth rates are very low. So what they're doing is they're trying to get talented people from across the world, and Indians are at the top of the list. So a lot of Indians do end up spending time in South Korea and so on. I've worked in South Korea myself for a couple of years, and I think it's a fantastic place to be in. It's going to be a little bit of a culture shock, but then if you're willing to learn a new language, then you'll quickly understand that the research R&D in South Korea and Japan is the best in the world, among the best in the world. That's why if you do a master's degree in these countries, it becomes very easy for you to get into the best of universities in the US, like MIT or Stanford or Harvard and so on. It's definitely worth pursuing. If your dream is to go to Harvard or MIT and you're not from a great school in India, if you don't have a good grade point average, your marks are not great, just consider going to South Korea, work on some high-end projects with professors out there. And many of them are working on excellent projects. Just work with them. And it's very easy to get through the US or UK and universities like Oxford and Cambridge. I would also say that in addition to Korea and Japan, you should also maybe consider a country like Canada if your language skills are not great, but then you still want to study in good universities. Canada has a lot of very good universities. But just remember that even though we look at Canada as one big country, most of the big cities in Canada are very close to the US border. They're probably a hand-picked number of cities, and all of them are super close to the US border. And most of Canada, there's nothing much out there. It's wasteland out there outside the big cities. So the cities of Toronto, the cities of Vancouver, these are really the hotspots where a lot of people want to be in. There are also a bunch of cities in between. I have people who are staying in places like Edmonton. Again, there's just so many cities out there. Like there's McGill University in Canada, which also offers very good education. You can settle on Quebec. And again, there's just lots and lots of options. So it's a good place to be in. And they actually have a process by which they encourage highly skilled applicants to apply through their highly skilled immigrant list. So there is a program they run called Highly Skilled Immigrants, and it's based on a point system. So based on your age, your marital status, your education status, your amount of work experience, and your proficiency of language, they allocate you certain points. And the fun thing is that sitting in India, you can already check what's your number of points by going to their website, their skilled entry program for skilled immigrants. check it up and you can see the number of points and decide if you make the cutoff. Every year the cutoffs are published. If you make above the certain cutoff, sitting in India, you will get a work visa to go to Canada and settle down there. So you don't need to necessarily study to go to Canada. Sitting in India, you can just apply directly on their website and be selected for the skilled immigrant program. So I think those are some advantages in Canada. The only caution about Canada, like I said, is it's a very cold place. It's situated right close to the North Pole, right? It's very close to that location. So and most of it, there's nothing much happening outside the big cities, and the big cities are close to the US border. And I had friends telling me that from Canada, tell me that many of them, when they look at job opportunities, they don't stick around in Canada, they actually migrate to the US. Also, if you settle down in Canada, I think you become eligible for something called, they have a NAFTA treaty, that is US, Mexico, and Canada signed a treaty by which skilled immigrants could move across country and work without really needing an H-1B work visa. And I believe Indians should be eligible for that if they become a long-term resident, a permanent resident in the Canadian region, and if they become eligible for citizenship. So check it out, but I think there's a fantastic options of actually being in Canada, and then you could also move over to US and work. So I think those are very good options. Okay, folks, so hopefully I covered a bunch of countries and I was able to give some clarification. Clearly, it's not everything, but get a sense of what we are trying to talk about. Let me know if you have other questions. I'll be happy to take it up. So let me know in the comments below. And until next time, bye-bye.